Good morning and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am Dan Bloodworth, and as you can see, this is going to be an Unchained TTRPG hot take. When does a PC backstory become problematic? So, you may have already realized that this is a second attempt at this same video because the slideshow presentation that I had attempted to use in my first recording of this video did not work as planned. It kind of got frozen on one screen and stayed there. So it was just a matter of setting the PowerPoint incorrectly. So now it should work because I tested it out this time, and I apologize for any time that you wasted in there. Even though you had the audio of everything, you didn't quite have the visual presentation, which I was hoping for. So, without further ado, let me just reintroduce where this is coming from and start with as a hot take. So a hot take is basically a very quick response to an issue that has come up, and so this is a conversation or based on a conversation that I was having on Facebook over the past few days with another gamer out there. And when we started talking about backstories, and I had mentioned that my philosophy is that a first level character really shouldn't have very much of a backstory, and one if a player came to my table with a very voluminous backstory for their character, I would see that as being problematic. And where our disagreement really came from was that the fact that when I spoke of my response to that kind of an event, I kind of jumped right to the very last step in the process that I would normally follow. So I came off as very harsh or just not a very good approach to it, and I didn't properly put it out there in the context that I'm about to now. And so you will see the development of my idea around PC backstories and how they can become problematic. So without further ado, let's cross fingers and hope that this presentation works as planned. So here we have the Unchained TTRPG hot takes. When does a PC backstory become problematic? So what should a character backstory be? Again, this is my opinion. This is kind of my expectation of what I hope a player would bring to the table with their character, whether they're pre-rolled a character and came up with a backstory, or this could also be developed during a session zero, which is typically I think the best way to do this. But let's go right to point number one. What is the character's name and race or species? Obviously, this is very important information to know right up front. Where is the character from? So, provided that the player is somewhat familiar of the world setting that you're using, they will either choose a place where their character is from, or you might help them also develop that idea as well. What is the profession of the character's parents? I always like to kind of know what some of the background of the character is. This might explain non-weapon proficiencies that the character might have, or it might just give some insight into the character's upbringing and possibly inform their motivations as well. What non-class or non-weapon proficiencies does the character have, which I just finished explaining. Why that's important to know. What attribute or trait does the character have that stands out? So I always found that this is a very good way of um, expressing how the outside world, might see this character. If they have a very noticeable physical trait, or if they have an attribute that is, you know, virtually either so high or so low that it kind of stands out and leaves an impression upon a person encountering them, whether it be the DM seeing how the character would reflect in the world, or an NPC or other PC relations, and interactions. What class is the character upon reaching level 1? All right, again, very important piece of information to know what class the character is. What was one event that brought the character to first level? So I'm not talking about a whole series of events and everything. I think it's just important to know what was the last most significant event that moved the character from being a 0 level, normal common person, to a first level adventuring character. What is one major motivation and two minor motivations? All right, and again, this kind of informs the DM of, what this character, what the player's intent is for this character, and what are some ideas of what is going to drive this character, make this character want to go adventuring, and it helps the DM start to plan ahead as to what elements of this background he or she can now start incorporating into either adventures or campaigns, or the world setting as a whole, as well, if they're building the world as they go. So the next is what a character backstory should not be. So these are the elements that, in my opinion, should not be in a character backstory. The backstory should not be more than basic info on the previous slide as shown, and should be approximately 1 to 2 paragraphs for a first level character. You don't have to have a long, flowing novella written about your first level character. It's one of the reasons why I like to, when I start a new campaign, I like to start all new campaigns with first level characters, and I often encourage the players to make their first level characters the minimum age for their racial and class level that's required. All right. So if the minimum age for a human fighter is 18 years old, that's where I like to start first level characters that are human fighters at 18 years old. That way they're not going to have a very significant backstory, and it could be handled in just 1 or 2 paragraphs. It should not grant any advantage not generated by character creation unless approved by the DM. If I were going to allow for an advantage to be granted to the character based on their backstory, I would also include at least 1 or possibly 2 disadvantages also built into the character as part of their backstory. It should not predetermine any future status or event that has yet to be experienced. So there's a difference between having a goal and then writing in the character's backstory that they had achieved something that hasn't occurred yet. So even saying, well, my character is a future lord of his own manor, well, that hasn't happened yet. And so it has no place in the in the character backstory, and having that predetermined and expectation for where the character is going to cause problems, which I'll deal with a little bit later in the next slide or two. It should not include any story element that is outside of the DM's setting or vision for the campaign. All story elements should be done in consultation with the DM in session 0. That's very, very important that session 0 is utilized to hash out some of these issues that might arise from a character's backstory. When I say no element should be included, that really is a very cut and dry thing. If I have a player who has a half-elven ranger who wants to use a laser rifle, that's not part of my Greyhawk campaign, and so it's not going to be included. All right. He and I, or she and I, are going to have to try to hash this out and come up with a solution to resolve the issue during session 0. And that kind of segues into the next slide. How can excessive backstory be problematic? All right, so here are the problems that I can see arising, or I have witnessed arising from an excessive backstory. An excessive backstory can create an unreasonable expectations on the part of the player. He or she may naturally expect that every element of their backstory will in some way be reflected in every adventure. And I have seen this where a player just wants to be the star of the interaction taking place. Wants their backstory to be addressed as often or even really frequently as possible. So that's one problem. It could conflict with the plans or vision of the campaign or the world setting of the DM, especially if no consultation occurred. If the DM and the players have not sat down and hashed out what the vision of the campaign or the world setting is, that's partly the fault of the DM. That should take place, but players should also wait before they develop their backstories until the session 0, so that they can work these things out with the DM, simultaneously. Another problem is that it takes the player's focus off what adventures, experiences, and social interactions that may lie ahead and remain mired in the past, where the DM and the other players have no experience, knowledge, or have an interest in. The other players aren't necessarily going to be invested in a player character's background that's not their own. All right. They might be interested to know little details about it, but they're not going to be invested. And so when a backstory is so fleshed out and forward-thinking or forward-looking, then that could interfere with the other players' own interactions and desires, what they're looking to do. It could lead to derailing the rest of the group's fun, which is the point that I just made. How I would handle a problematic backstory, and this is where I kind of fell short on Facebook with my commentary. I would have been better off having sat back, thought about it a little bit, and then put this down. So the first step is to review characters and their backstories during session 0. Then have a discussion with each player individually if necessary. So key point here is that session 0. This is where you review every character as a DM, you read their backstories, and you start thinking about how you can start meshing these things together and making them work in your adventure, your campaign, and your game world. Explain to the players what elements of their backstories can work, and especially how they can be dealt with as a collection to enhance party cohesion. This is the begin with the positive first approach. So as you can see, the very first two bullets in my steps are positive, and they're trying to just work these things out and pointing out the strengths of the character's backstory, and then seeing how they will work together. Next, identify and discuss individually with the player whose backstory does not work well with the vision of the world, campaign, or in general with the rest of the party, what the rest of the party is planning. Be constructive and ask the player to work with you to tweak their backstory. So again, even when you have those inconsistencies or backstory elements that don't fit, still sit down with the player and try to work them out. And so the first three steps are again still all positive. If the player refuses to make any changes, inform the player that you as the DM will not recognize or account for the elements that are an issue. It is okay to say no as the DM. So that last line I know is going to spark some controversy because there is that that sphere of thought of role-playing games that player agency in a storytelling RPG should never be infringed upon. That you should always say, or you should always look to say yes first and make every effort to say yes to every request or demand of a player, because it is their story that they're looking to tell, and it's not the DM's story. And I disagree with that, and I will always say that it is okay to say no as the DM. It is your table, your game world, your campaign, and the player's agency comes in when they're creating their character, so long as it does fit within the vision that you have for the campaign, game world, and setting, and everything that you're playing in, and then they can take it from there. You know, how they move through your setting and your campaign is up to them. That's where their agency is reasserted again. But at this stage here, the DM has the ability to just say no. In some cases, the other players, through their character's actions, might also rectify the issue by overruling the PC's attempts to dominate the group's collective story. In rarer cases, I have heard of and even participated in direct or indirect PvP. So now on one occasion, when I was much younger and playing in a Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition game, another one of the players was just a real drag. His character, I should say, was a real drag on the rest of the party. And my thief character actually hung him out to dry in a particular dungeon, and he was killed. And the player had no idea what was going on. I had coordinated or colluded with the DM, and the DM approved the PvP. And although there was a chance that I could be discovered in what was occurring, I wasn't, and kind of got away with it. and the players never knew. I mean, we kept it a secret, and never knew that that character actually set him up to die until she was later on killed in a future adventure. And so and that's when we revealed to him the full aspect of that. But we allowed for PvP in our campaigns for most of the time that we were playing. If the player persists in interjecting the prohibited elements, destructing the table in any way, death finds a way, which is something I just explained. But still make it a meaningful death and don't create the circumstances where it is an absolute certainty, just something that was likely to happen, which again is what I just described there. There was a chance that he wouldn't get killed. There was a chance that I would be discovered in that indirect PvP, but it certainly would have, even if it was unsuccessful in killing the character, the player may get the idea, hey, my character needs to adjust the way that he or she is behaving. Conclusion. Backstories are important, but an RPG is about experiencing what stories have yet to be told. And once again, that's my absolute belief. Backstories are important, all right? But when you're sitting down at the table, it's about what you're going to experience together moving forward, not where your characters are really coming from. So hopefully this is all a rare experience, but one I have seen and heard of a bit more frequently in recent months, and that's the bad or problematic backstories. This has to do with, I believe, with the RPGs where character death is a rare event. In such systems, players wrap their characters in that safety blanket of apparent invincibility and the expectation that all of their characters' motivations will be fed and their goals met. And this is particularly true when they write those backstories that are forward-reaching and conferring upon them titles that they haven't achieved yet, or levels or whatever, a level of influence that they haven't achieved yet. This and other unreasonable expectations needs to be addressed in session 0. If not there, then rule 0 must be utilized. And rule 0, if you're not familiar with it, is where the DM is the final arbiter of all things game rules wise, all things that are taking place at the table. Should there be these unreasonable expectations and or problematic gameplay. So once again, if you, and I know this is a second videoing of this, but if you want to return to this new version of it and leave the same comments that you did previously, you're certainly welcome to do so. I hope that you do, because we were having some very good conversations there about this subject. If you haven't seen this video yet, please, I hope you enjoy it. I welcome you to comment and leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and leave your comments in there. And if you hadn't subscribed, please consider subscribing. I have attempted to put out more videos more frequently than every 3 or 4 days, and so just once in a while I have to go back and redo a video. So hopefully that doesn't happen too many other times. The first time I'm using a PowerPoint presentation in this video format, so I'm not surprised that it didn't work exactly as planned. Anyhow, thanks for joining. Again, any comments that you want to leave, please feel free to leave them. And I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime soon. going to have another video talking about some of the projects that I'm currently working on, and possibly a new campaign I'm looking to start utilizing either second edition AD&D or for Gold and Glory, which is more likely, which is a clone of second edition AD&D. So with that, please have a great rest of your afternoon. Stay safe out there and take care. Thank you.